Greetings and welcome to Gumbo the Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lindsay Gary. Gumbo the Podcast highlights Africa and its many manifestations from the perspective of African people globally. Focusing on history and culture, its purpose is to educate, empower, connect, and liberate the African diaspora. On today's episode, we'll be discussing celebrating African music from the continent to the diaspora. And our guests today will share their knowledge around this topic. On today's episode, we're welcoming two amazing guests. One is Jennifer Gardner and the other is Kehinde Graham. Born and raised in the artistically diverse Chicago, she's accustomed to understanding and connecting the nuances of building community and powerful networks. Jennifer has served on the executive board for Xi Lambda chapter of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated, helped numerous nonprofit organizations reorient their goals, and small firms build effective marketing blueprints. She holds a BA in African and Black Diaspora Studies and a minor in International Studies, as well as an MA in Africology and African American Studies from Temple University, and specializes in popular culture, hip-hop, and community-based education. Kehinde Graham is an emerging scholar practitioner of Africana Studies and Africana religions, as well as a student of Afro-Cuban Orisha music. He holds a BA from Howard University, an MA in religion from Temple University, and is completing his MA in Africana Studies at the University of Delaware. His thesis explores the role of the environment in the reconstitution of Yoruba sacred music, and thus the broader spiritual tradition in Cuba. His other research interests include material culture studies, environmental studies, and historiography. Chad has received grants or fellowships from the National Humanities Center, the Center for Material Culture Studies, and the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts. Outside of his intellectual work, Chad is an instructional coach, working with college and high school students interested in becoming teachers. So welcome. We always have great guests. So welcome to Jennifer and Kehinde. I'm glad to have y'all here to be discussing this today. And so let's jump into the conversation. So I want to start off with Jennifer to talk about hip hop. So Jennifer, you heard in her bio, has a special interest and expertise in hip hop. And so we just celebrated 50 years of hip hop. And I want to touch on what is hip hop and what are its origins.
Yes. So hello, everyone. Thank you, Lindsay, for having me on the Gumbo podcast. I'm very excited to be here with our colleague, Kehinde. And I feel like this conversation will be necessary and definitely on time. So it's exciting to celebrate 50 years of hip hop because it's truly a genre that no one thought would surpass a lot of the other cultural moments in our history. So what we hear, I always say hip hop is the culture. It is the umbrella that holds us safely from the rain of white supremacy, of US violence and state sanctioned abuse. But rap music, which is probably the most prominent feature element of hip hop, is the music that we hear from it. We also have under that umbrella and in our culture, hip hop culture, we have our fashion, our style, we have the knowledge, know thyself. The fifth principle, as KRS-One, the teacher would say, is the most important, to know yourself, know your roots. You have beat breaking, which is DJing in a sense, breaking turntables. Then you have break dancing. And then, of course, you have graffiti work or the actual visual art of hip hop. So different facets of the same people, of the same cultures. And I'm very grateful that I could see sort of three different eras and genres of hip hop, starting with the late 90s, where we're having conscious rap that's turning fun. Then we had the early 2000s, my generation, where it's really party music. We're really stepping outside and enjoying ourselves, as I say, finding a pleasure in life. And then now we're in this era where it's a mix of we call it trap jazz, but it's jazz elements. So you're getting that poetry, you're getting that trill, the different complex chords in songs, while also still using language that's relatable to younger generations and still having participation from like teens of our era. So I'm very grateful to talk about hip hop and its capacity and how it's grown with our people
It's
from
beautiful.
1419 to 1520 Cedric Avenue.
Okay. Look, and you know what's amazing is I love how you broke down all the different elements because I think, as you mentioned, rap being so prominent or the most prominent element, sometimes people don't recognize that hip hop and rap are necessarily mutually exclusive or synonymous. There are other elements that are just as important, even though they're not necessarily given the same amount of attention globally or consistently. So when you talk about the knowledge being the most important part, like that's actually the part I hear the least when people talk about the elements. I hear people say, graffiti and like style, because I thought about the style after the fact. You hear people talk about, of course, rap and DJing, but I rarely hear the knowledge. And to me, that is the essence of what it is about. And so thank you for highlighting that. And I want to talk about a little bit more about the elements, as we are talking about, as the podcast title suggests, we are talking about African music. And so when I hear people refer to hip hop, we refer to it as, an African American art form. And I want to add a little bit more to that because we know that the people that are really creating what these various elements of hip hop, they have different roots as Black people, right? You have people coming from down south into New York who are, considered our Southern African Americans. You have people coming from the English speaking Caribbean, Jamaica being a huge uh, wave into New York and a major contributing factor to hip hop. Because I very rarely hear people mention the Caribbean influence, and also a lot of that Caribbean influence is a Spanish speaking Caribbean as well. You have people who are, from Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. All these people are coming together in the Bronx. So when we talk about it being African American, it is in the sense that that is where it's developed. But I want to talk about those origins before, like how did these people come together? And then obviously we know African Americans from the South, the Afro Latinos, or in the Caribbean Black folk, they all came from one root on the continent of Africa, right? So it is technically
Absolutely.
a manifestation of African music in a new locale. So can you talk a little, maybe give us two examples? Well, give me another example of how it relates back to African culture. When I think about the first one, the main one I think about is call and response. I think about, you're on the mic and you saying something, you have somebody saying something back to you. But what are some of these other elements that we can clearly see that have African roots?
Yes, that was well articulated. Our diaspora is so globally connected that oftentimes we forget how we relate to our sisters and brothers across the country, across the seas, across the continent. And I want to add, just before I give an example, that the knowledge is community based and it can be learned, but it's also something that is kind of nurtured in your environment. It's nurtured in the neighborhoods. That's where that knowledge, know thyself, referring back to your roots, it comes from how well connected you are to your community. How well can you preserve the good parts of your community and promote it through this music. So I think that part of the knowledge has a community-based focus, which is an African philosophy. It's an Afrocentric principle, which is really knowing your center, knowing that axology, for those that are familiar with Dr. Asante's theory of Afrocentricity. So an example, yes, call and response is probably the most familiar of rap. But one thing I like to kind of point to is sort of the language. A lot of the things that we hear that sounds like gibberish to us, it's actually like either a principle, a word, a type of identity that we see in Africa. One thing I love is Young Thug and Yin Yang Twins. Two different eras of hip hop, but they have the same like Southern, like, yeah, like it's a call to their community, and it's fun, it's lighthearted, but it also has traces back to Senegal. I can't remember the particular tribe, but they have a call and response in their songs, and there's a YouTube video that I can link if you share like a bibliography after the episodes, where you can hear the same type of like verbiage and like call responses. I think that's probably the most unique element of hip hop because people don't often realize that we're relating to our community, we're relating to our people with these sounds. They're not just random or ignorant in a way, they have meaning. Another thing, the dance moves, of course, we see similarities between, I like to point out the way Black women, there's this particular pose that when you're at the height of your career as a Black woman in rap, as a hip hop artist, there's this particular move where you kind of move your hip. It's hip work. Christina Bombay calls it hip work, where your body is kind of moving in a gyration. And we see that across different African tribes all the time. The gyration, how it's very similar to what we're doing here in the US. So those are just two examples of how it's continuous in our culture and how we should really like be observant and aware and empathetic to the way that different cultures relate to hip hop.
Absolutely. That's so brilliant. I think a lot of times, when we hear hip hop, what I appreciate is, at least the origins. I know we don't always have authentic rappers, if you will, as an example,
Yeah.
but in terms of its origin, it's about being authentic, telling these truths, and sharing these real lived experiences, whatever they may be. And it makes me think about, how that is communicated with our grammar. It's not something that is, I have to speak standard English when I'm rapping or when I'm sharing whatever, but it's really coming from a place. To me, hip hop is an archive of African grammar in different ways, because depending on where you are, you're going to have a different, people call it slang, but it's more than just slang, right? It's how we talk. That's our culture, so I
Yeah.
love how you can see that the what people call onomatopoeias, the sound effects we make, all those kind of things, they have a root, and we're connecting to them even if we don't recognize it as being an ancestral connection. They really are. And so on that note, I want to bring in Kehinde, because this directly relates with all Black music. I want to be clear that all Black music in the diaspora, we can very similar things, like these connections, whether that's jazz, blues, gospel, music from Brazil, music from Jamaica, whether that's reggae, whether that's samba, reggae, anything like that. You can still make these types of connections. But I want to bring in Kehinde on that point, because I want to talk about Afro-Cuban drumming, because it's so stylized and so unique, and it's such a tangible way of seeing Africa in the diaspora through music. So can you talk to us just about first of all, what does it mean to have Afro-Cuban drumming? What are those origins of it?
First, thank you, Dr. Lindsay, for having me, and thank you for Sister Jennifer for, of course, kind of clearing, or not even clearing, but opening the way with that beautiful treatment of hip hop. Afro-Cuban drumming, it's so interesting because it's a particular kind of thing, but it's many things wrapped up into one. So, as the name suggests, it refers to the African musical traditions of Cuba, right? And it's a cultural term, but it's also political, thinking about how Africans on the island like made a conscious push and movement to think about their culture, to hold on and preserve their culture in a very particular way. And and so oftentimes when people think about Afro-Cuban drumming or Afro-Cuban music, you have to go to rumba, which is kind of like their party music, their social music, so to speak. Uh, you know, juxtaposing it with hip hop. And then there are a couple other forms of like son, but the other side of that Afro-Cuban music or Afro-Cuban drumming that people often refer to is the Santeria or Lukumi music, right? The Orisha music, which uh, which hails from what we know as the Bight of Benin, which is also which can also be used to refer to modern day, southern Nigeria, Benin, Togo, and as the moniker says, Afro-Cuban also refers to those traditions that come out of the Congo, out of Ghana, out of the Calabar region, and all of those peoples who went to Cuba, similar with hip hop, they don't just stop being who they are, right? They extend those musical practices, those ways of knowing, those kind of modes of relation into this Spanish speaking context, and colonialism is a part of that. So um, to wind this down, you have kind of an intermixing of these different styles. You know what I mean? If just like gumbo, you're pulling in these similar but varying elements to create something old and new at the same time. And so that in a nutshell is Afro-Cuban drumming.
Wow.
Drums are a big part of that, but there are other instruments too. So I just say Afro-Cuban music.
I appreciate your okay, a couple things, because I had a lot to say, but I really appreciate your talking about that last point you made, but also the intentionality point that you mentioned earlier, because I think a lot of times we assume that what we're doing is random. Now, granted, over time, I think sometimes we know there's evidence that maybe things I don't think we lose things, but maybe we lose or we forget or may not be completely aware of how intentional it was to begin with. But
Absolutely.
I don't think we've lost anything, right? And I think you made the point about the intentionality of these enslaved people to make the decision and say, we're going to continue our traditions, because that is revolutionary, that thought, because there's so much out here that teaches us that we lost everything, that we don't have a culture, that we are disconnected from our origins. And hip hop is proof that that didn't happen. All the music of Cuba and all the things we're actually doing in the diaspora, whether it's music or any other form of our culture, that is evidence that those things are on a continuum. Whereas but we also have to acknowledge we do have new manifestations and developments, but that itself is African. Just because it's not something that was being done exactly that way 300 years ago doesn't mean it's less African than something that was being done 300 years ago or in a certain way 300 years ago. So I think that point about the old and new is important, right? Because even with these contact situations of colonialism and enslavement, there are going to be, various influences maybe from other groups, but I also recognizing that because of those influences, we create shifts and varied things to keep our culture. So it may look a little different, but it doesn't mean it's lost its essence. So I appreciate your commentary around that. And I want to ask you about a couple things. So you mentioned the influences from very particular parts of Africa, which is so important to name. You have, the Bight of Benin region, which is, what we know as Yoruba land, Benin, parts of Benin, Nigeria, and Togo. And then also going into Central Africa, in the Congo region, right? And obviously other groups being very big. Well, I wouldn't even say influences, but like the foundations of, Afro-Cuban music. And with that, we do know there are other instruments, but in terms of the drum, what is the importance, or not even just the importance, what is the purpose of the drum? Because, we hear drum, we be like, okay, that's, what I'm saying, that get us going, like Dave Chappelle, like that, the drum gonna get Black people going, no matter what kind of drum or what kind of percussive substitution when we weren't able to get drums. we're gonna go off on that beat, right? But like beyond that, why are drums like so fundamental to who we are as a people?
It's something I'm still trying to wrap my brain around, to be quite honest. Um, you know, it's its own form of, technology. We can kind of wax poetic about the many uses of drums as a form of communication, from one, town to the next, or, in long distances, or as a kind of social thing. I think one way or another, the drum calls people together. And, it's in so many forms. It's still a piece of wood from a tree trunk, right? Hollowed out with a skin stretched over it as a kind of membrane, sometimes on multiple sides. And it's usually rope or some other material used to tune and fasten all the different parts together. And I think about that bass from the drum, like whether it's a hand drum or a stick drum, or that bass, it just goes through you. You know what I mean? Like almost like a kind of external repetition of a heartbeat. You know what I mean? Like, and that, because it taps into, that thing that we all have, it can also pull us all together in beautiful ways, and in various ways.
Oh my gosh, that's so poetic the way you put it. And it's so real because, we all have internal rhythm. Our bodies have heartbeats. The environment has rhythm. Nature has rhythm. You can hear rhythm in the way birds chirp or the way, the wind blows, right? It's connecting us to each other, to nature, to supreme divinities, like spirit, it's connecting us to those things. And I think I remember hearing a comment, I'm gonna keep it brief, but I remember hearing a comment once about a friend of mine who she was, Black American, African American, but she went to a church that was, most of the people in the congregation were, born in the continent, or on the continent of Africa. And so she remembered there was a big complaint that the congregation had about drums. They're like, we don't want drums at church. And she was baffled because she was like, why? Like, we Black, we have drums at church. And even me, I grew up in a Catholic church, and we had, and I mean, not just a drum set, but like African drums, djembes specifically. And I remember people were like, no, we can't have that in her church. And then we were talking about it, and she was saying it occurred to her that, wow, like they understood something that she didn't. And I started telling her, I was like, it's funny you say that, because I'm also coming to that conclusion that they're understanding something that you don't. They recognize the drum as a spiritual instrument. It's not, it's deeper than it sounds good. It makes you feel good. It's connected to something spiritually. And in a lot of our cultural traditions of ancient times, and even just in the present, the drums are used in ceremonies, in spiritual, African spiritual ceremonies. So these people were at a church, and so they were recognizing the drum as something that's used in spiritual ceremony. So they said, that's actually not what we want. We're not trying, we're Christian. And this is what they were, even though they were, from the continent, they were very like anti-African spirituality. And so they didn't want to bring in something that they felt went against their Christian beliefs. And we were talking about that. I'm like, that speaks volumes on it's sad, part one, but it speaks volumes on just the level of what the drum represents, Now, I know that some people, there are some, well, many, I would say many, if not most, African cultures or African cultural groups have initiation processes for drums. Why is that?
Uh,
Drummers are initiated.
yes, as you said, it's definitely a common tradition or practice in and of itself across the continent and the diaspora. On one level, it's because a lot of the drums that we hear or see in religious ceremonies are themselves kind of sacred objects, right? We they're in many cases they are shrines in a sense. So how can you as an individual play something if you aren't also equipped with the thing to play? You know what I mean? How can I'm trying to think of a hip hop analogy, but it's like how can you jump into cipher? Well, you don't just jump into cipher out of nowhere and just start doing whatever. You know what I mean? You kind of have to be prepared in a way, whether that's the kind of practice and just experience around ciphers beforehand, or the kind of whatever level of preparation you might do with playing and handling drums. It's that and more, right? It's almost like getting baptized. Like you can't have there we go. You can't have a preacher who ain't been baptized. That don't make no sense. You know what I
Can you
mean?
imagine?
So wait, hold up. What? You've been on the pulpit for how many years? You know what I mean? So when it comes to drumming, it's the care and like in the physical sense, the kind of energy and kind of way to move through the world in order to handle that drum. You know, it's not just when you're playing it, but it's also after the party's over and you got to then take care of that drum, right? And it's also the knowledge of how to do that, knowledge of how to understand and resonate with this sacred instrument, um, that is often cleaning people in a spiritual sense, which is honoring people and saluting other people. Uh, yeah, it's a lot. It's. I'll just leave it at that because I'll end up talking about something else that I then have to kind of backtrack and try to explain. But I think that's the simplest way to think about it.
Well, I love this point that we're on, and I just want to kind of throw in too, because you said a few things, Kendi, that I'm like, definitely we have this in hip hop as well. It's a part
Mm-hmm.
of our music essentially. So you said,
No, I was just
oh
gonna say,
yeah,
actually, sorry, I was gonna actually ask y'all about those connections. So y'all right on it. Let's go. We're on the
yes.
same page.
Well, one thing you said was that it's about the similar, but it's varying, that the drums are essentially bringing it's older, but it's relating to something that's newer, more vibrant. That's essentially what sampling does for hip hop. We're renewing, revigorating, bringing a fresh lens to music that we've heard in the past, or we may have grown up on, or our parent may relate to our parents. But we're bringing it to a newer generation, a younger generation that has no like tangible connection, like in the time, they don't have any connection to it, except for when it's being interpolated in their artist's song, or it's being remixed or sampled or covered by their artist. I always like to bring Mary J. Blige in as an example, because she's the R&B hip hop soul queen. Honestly, her place in hip hop as an R&B artist has been so special, because not only has she have been featured on some very important hip hop songs like Method Man and Mary J. Blige, You're All I Need. But she's also covered a number of like soul artists, blues artists, gospel artists over her career, that she's brought fresh lens. Like that's so funny. The young girl that I babysat for years, she didn't know that I'm Going Down was originally Rose Royce song. It wasn't Mary J. Blige. She thought Mary J. Blige was the end all be all. Corinne Bailey Ray has a version of Aretha Franklin's Daydreaming, and she didn't know that was originally Aretha Franklin. So I'm seeing how these interpolated songs, these covers, are being done in a way that connects to a younger generation. And then I wanted to touch on the point where Kendi said about ciphers and how you can't just enter a cipher randomly. Like you have to, what we say, pick up the beat. You have to find the beat. And and jump on it, get in the rhythm of it. I think about bass drums and hip hop music and how truly DJs, there's a scene in the Wu-Tang American Saga on Hulu where the man who's playing RZA says, well, we have to add more bass because that's what the dance floor is like. We have to match the dance floor. And I think that was a key point in how drumming can be prevalent in hip hop music, specifically in the bass and how we use bass. We use the bass to connect to the spirit. I always talk about how when you hear, and Lindsay, you definitely know this coming from the South, like how they have those speakers booming and you hear them coming down the block until you see any car in sight. So it's a way to connect. Sorry. So yeah, you can hear the bass before you even see the car. It's a way to announce that you're coming. It's a way to connect to your people. It's a way that you make it known who you are, whose you are, So I love the topic of drumming, of bass. I think that is such an important element for our people. Miri Baraka and his Blues People that book, he says the drum beat is the language that we get from the divine. I'm paraphrasing, but like essentially that's the connection that we have to one another because spiritual people use drums.
I love that. I love that, especially the part about it's supposed to move people. Like the lyric, MC means move the crowd. Like it's not just about what the musician is doing or the person in front of the mic is doing. It's about how they are able to interact with and inspire movement out of, everyone else, whether that's a call to war, whether that's a call to get on the dance floor, whatever it is, a call to praise and worship, a lot of people, regardless of what the preacher might say, if the choir ain't hitting, they might not be there. They might not be there on Sundays, or they're gonna be at somebody else's church. And so just the aspect of pulling. We can't even say people. You just said spirit. Because that's you got. If you ain't singing down the Holy Spirit, sorry, you can't be the soloist. I'm sorry. You know what I mean? It's no disrespect. You know what I mean? And one of the things I'm interested in hearing from Sister Jennifer, because you know better about this than I do, but it's all five elements are equally important, if not the knowledge part is above the rest of them, but still it's five of them. But somehow the MC and then later the soloist is kind of elevated above everybody else. Like, why is that? I'm wrestling with it.
And I have a theory about that. Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll start off with my personal theory that I think hip hop is the only institution that we have as African Americans that are manufactured and influenced by us in the United States, from sound, the music, the style, the fashion. Now I think that emceeing, the artist, the performer that's on stage with the mic gets the most recognition from our people. I think because of white supremacy. Honestly, corporations see Black people as a commodity, as capital, and the physical body is probably the most familiar way that they know how to use us up. We're becoming hip on intellectual property, so it's really hard for people to get graffiti from us, fashion from us, particular art. It's really hard for them to get that. But one thing we haven't learned just yet, and we're becoming hip on it now, like post 2015, we're becoming a lot more aware of contract agreements and how we play a part in that. But I think the MC, the artist, gets the most recognition because it's just a space in corporate America that we haven't had the most success in. It's all about contracts. When you're using the body, the physical body, you have to put people on paper in order to get them to work, essentially. I hate the way that sounds because we as Black people aren't just capital and commodities, but that's how they view us. And we've never really gotten out of that type of industry in the US. We've only modified it, changed it, kind of reworked it based off of our politics, our own community politics. But yeah, that's just my theory. I don't exactly know if that's what record labels and like I think about Ticketmaster and how they are an oligarchy in the US right now. But
Yes.
I don't know if that's their boardroom conversations, but I can only imagine, with the hidden language, how they view us as Black people.
And I would actually, and I'm glad you said the part about white supremacy, because that's exactly what I would say, and that's exactly what I've heard, is that, when we look at hip hop, it is a huge global moneymaker. It is something that record labels got a hold of and still have a hold of to a certain extent. They can't hold us as a people, as a collective culture, but elements of it they really try to control whatever they can control to make money. And I do remember hearing about the removal of the DJ, because back in the day the DJ was up there with the rapper, like front and center. The MC and the DJ, they went hand in hand. And so now that's not even well, now DJs are kind of having a major resurgence, but for a while that wasn't even a thing. So there's this way that white supremacy, capitalism are trying to essentially capitalize on what we do, and extract and kind of distort certain elements of what we do. I mean, this is why you hear very few clear, in my opinion, clear representations of the knowledge element in our popular rap music. I mean, to a certain extent, even knowledge can be a broad thing, but that's the part that is minimized when we're promoting, when our music is promoted. It's this the major part of it is, again, it's almost like a distorted version of what was originally intended. And I want to kind of backtrack a little bit, because y'all both said some great things, and I want to talk about real quick sampling. Jennifer, you mentioned this aspect of the old and new that Kehinde had talked about before. That is powerful, and I'm glad you brought it back, because I think when we talk about hip hop, that is one of the roots of it, right? Like, you're playing music that already exists as a DJ. You're on the turntables mixing something in a new way. And whether that's, some reggae, or whether that's, this some R&B, some soul music, that is the root of it. And that's really powerful to think, because I had never really thought about that being a central part of it. I don't know why, but just not in that way. And that speaks volumes on us tapping into something that we are familiar with, and wanting to build on it, restructure it, but still keep that root. That's so real. And also, y'all both have mentioned these parts about the connections between the two, like whether that's drumming and hip hop, for example. When I think about, I think a comment y'all both made about dance and music, those things go hand in hand. And that's something that is very powerful that Black people do. I remember when I was asked to choreograph something when I was getting my undergrad in the dance department, I was asked to choreograph something without music. And I remember I really struggled. I was like, huh? How am I choreograph something without music? Like, that is a lot. But I was here for the challenge, and it took me like years later to realize the reason why it was a great challenge, because there's so many other inspirations on how to create movement. You can use something you're seeing, not necessarily something you're hearing, right? Just or what you're feeling. There's something, and it was very generative, and I appreciated the practice, but I couldn't understand why I was so challenged by it. And I realized because fundamentally, as a Black person, you don't dance without music. It just like, it's not something that happens typically. It's something, those things go together. Yeah. Music and dance go together. So when you hear music, most of us are not just sitting there like this. You know, like if you ever go to an opera, people like this. But you know, when we hear music, there's usually a movement, even if it's like a sway or even if there's a head nod, there's something with it. So it's so interesting to think how intertwined our elements are. And it makes me think back to how really our structure of hip hop mimics the structure of African culture. Like we need the MC and we need the person who may be singing or speaking as a griot. I think about griots, and you have with the griots, you have, and this is all coming to my head as we speak, right? With a griot, you have, well, really a jelly is what they're really called, but you have that tradition of like, okay, I'm literally speaking knowledge. I'm sharing you your history. I'm going back to generations verbally and speaking that or singing that history while somebody's drumming, while people are doing some bar dance. Like it's all happening simultaneously. And it's so interesting to see how that element of hip hop, those things go together because that's how Black people work. Period.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like you just said, you in that moment of trying to choreograph a dance with no music, it's like, well, I'm not just kind of dancing for myself. Like there's supposed to be some kind of interplay. Like you don't just play for yourself. I get mad, sometimes when I hear live music and there's a DJ and he's just like he'll play we've all been there where DJ or him or her will play something, you start vibing to it, then you get in a groove, then they switch the song. It's like, what we we're feeling that. What are you feeling? Because you up there playing for yourself. And we also see it with musicians where you with them for a second and then they just kind of go on this run or whatever it is, and it's like, who are you playing for right now? It's what is going on? Like, all right, you lost us, brother, sister. We can't go there with you. We went over here, you went left.
And now no one's dancing.
Right. And now no one is dancing.
Like that gave me so many chills. Like what you said, it's like, wow. Understanding, I think no pun intended, the function, where we at, but also understanding like the function of our culture. It's not as look at you. It's not abstract. You know what I'm saying? And it's not to say that something can't be abstracted, but we don't typically abstract things in that way. So it's so interesting to think about those connections and the feeling. And you're right. Like I'm not like, if I know the DJ ain't gonna be good, I ain't gonna be there. Cause it's like the DJ, are you paying attention to how we feeling? It's an exchange, and that's what it boils down to.
Hello. I had the craziest experience in Houston last year because I felt like the DJs did not like women. And I say that because like a party is good if women are dancing too. If it's just men, okay, they like their hip hop, they know the lyric. But if you have women dancing, that's a party. And literally there were songs, the women are finally like, yeah, this is my song. They finally get up dancing. Not even the full chorus. They would cut it off mid-chorus and change it to like the most depressing, sad, drug-filled song ever. And it's like, you saw the women in here dancing. Why would you cut it off? So I think that DJs also have to know that knowledge as well and have that community orientation where they can relate to a crowd or they're curating an experience for a crowd.
Yes. Oh, first of all, what? Not in here. That's terrible.
See, and
I'm just shaking my head because it's all about, but things have changed since I was at the club. Let me say that.
Yeah, I didn't like it. That was at Playground, if you ever heard of.
Yeah. I have, but I ain't gonna be there.
Right. It wasn't gonna be there before. Definitely not gonna be there now. But you said a word because as soon as you said, I felt like the DJ ain't like women. Both Lindsay and I were like. So if you're not watching, the visual recording of this, you need to, because all of the facial expressions and the side eyes from Sister Jennifer and Sister Lindsay, we could write a thesis on that alone.
Right. Look, okay. It's the nonverbal for sure
communication, because it's truly how I felt. I was like, there's no way he's paying attention to us. There's no way. Like, the party is going when women are dancing because men love when women are happy. People love when other people are happy. And if you are created a space where everyone is kind of dull or don't want to dance or just interested in other things in the room, it's going to make the whole experience of the night kind of fall flat. And as a people, that's not what we do. I mean, everyone know that our people, we love to get together. We love being in community with one another. We love jiving and, like just being fun and lighthearted with one another. It's always a good time when you see your people. That's why, the internet says invite them to the cookout, because we know that when we're together, it's a good time.
Absolutely.
And then I wanted to bring up Linda James Meyer's quote where she says, in terms of African American culture, what preserved and developed were the essential qualities of the African worldview, a view concerned with metaphysical rather than purely physical interrelationships, such as that between music and poetry, religious functions and practice, man and nature. So it's always been a spiritual thing for us. No matter what we participate in, we have to invite the spirit in. We have to I don't want to say like negotiate, but it's a relationship between our physical body, our physical experiences, and our metaphysical relationship.
No, sis,
Yeah.
you went where I was going, and I have a prime example of that. This isn't just unique to Afro-Cuban Orisha drumming, or even ritual music traditions that require initiation or what have you. An essential part of what the drummers are doing is, we already said it, pulling everybody together. But if we go and say everybody, that means the people who hear physically and those who aren't. And one of the challenges that some drummers run into, especially the younger ones, I kind of mentioned, they might be playing for themselves or for each other. And so they might do particular things that they're testing out, that they're trying to get better at, or show off even. But in that, sometimes they'll lose, not just lose, the crowd or the attendance, but they're not even paying attention to it. You know what I mean? So part of being a drummer in these traditions is you have to understand how to read the crowd, and you have to be attuned to spirit, because at the end of the day, whether that's invoking possession or just saluting, an elder in the tradition, it ain't about you. It's about somebody else being pleased. It's about something higher, and you're not tapping into that if you're not. It's reading the room is kind of is too physical, or the material of a phrase, but y'all know what I'm saying. Like, if you're not connecting with something outside of yourself or everyone outside of yourself to accomplish that goal, and things can fall flat in a way where it's like it turns um other drummers will say it turns into Roomba, where, okay, this is just a party. You know what I mean? It's bigger than that. We're not just here to kick it and vibe. Like, no, we are here to accomplish a particular goal, and there's a way to do that, and there's a way to not do that. So needless to say, our musicians, our soloists, our our choir directors, I think, whether they talk about this like overtly or not, or explicitly, I think that's part of their job. Like, we have to be attuned to everything around us so that we can really get the most out, so that everyone else can get the most out of this experience. It's not even about the musician, it's not about the soloist, it's not about the choir. It's about the whole.
And I want to actually end on that note because it's so powerful. And we have to remember that music can be heard for a reason. You know what I'm saying? Because if we are hearing it because it's meant to be experienced, it's meant for everybody. If it was something that was just occurring in our head, a thought, that would be completely different. So music is something that is meant to be heard. It is heard. And for that reason, those other elements, right? Those other people or beings that are involved have to be at the center of what's happening with the music. So now that was both of y'all put everything so beautifully. And I want to even add just one final thought on that point that always is reassuring that, many of our cultural traditions have been appropriated culturally, right? From I don't think I have to explain hip hop cultural appropriation to our listeners. It's has global reach. It's, influenced many people. We love the exchange, right? We love the exchange of how it's influenced places like, in Africa, how Cuban music, has influenced places in Africa. Just as two illustrations of that, we have Afrobeats being heavily hip hop influence. We have, you see Congolese rumba as an exchange as well, right? And we love those things. The conversation back and forth between the content and the diaspora. That's what we love. But when we talk about this appropriation, where people who are not of us, right? People outside of our communities who try to extract, distort, capitalize, exploit what we're doing, that's a different conversation, which we have to talk about another day. We have to also remember that there is still light at the end of that tunnel. Of course, we're going to continue to fight back against it. I mean, I can't count the number of times I had to explain that most Latin music, actually, no, period. Popular Latin music is African music. It's Black music, period. I'm not talking about the stuff you may hear in a small community, because we also have indigenous American influence as well. But I'm talking about the popular Latin music, salsa, reggaeton, the new trap delineations of Latin music, that all come from us, period, right? A lot of that has been appropriated, but at the light of the end of the tunnel, I want to add is that they cannot appropriate our spirit, period. So you can be doing all that stuff, but you're still missing something that you will never, ever be able to extract, never be able to capitalize on those things. And that's, to me, what makes our music truly ours, is our understanding of the knowledge, understanding of the knowledge of the spirit, understanding the spirit, being moved by the spirit. Other people are moved by our music, but not in the same way that we are moved by our own selves and our own spirit. So I just want to leave it at that note. I want to thank you all. I know there's so much more to be said. I know it. But I know we do have to wrap up. So I want to thank you all. Y'all are phenomenal and brilliant. Thank you to our huge, phenomenal guest. And when I say huge, hugely phenomenal guest. So please go ahead and share any events, activities that you have coming up in the near future, and also how listeners can connect with you. So we'll start with Jennifer and then go to Kehinde.
Okay. Yes, thank you so much. I know we can go on and on about this conversation, and hopefully we'll get some good comments that we can follow up on later. But just want to thank you all for allowing me to speak in this space with honesty, with clarity, and with a little bit of light in it, because we have fun doing this. So I consider myself a pleasure Africologist. I am focusing on love, partnership, and sustaining Black commitments to one another. So you can follow me on Shirley May Match, or you can follow my actual business page, Arfundi, ROUR.FUNDI. That's my business page. I also have a website, jenniferpgardner.com, where you can get in touch with me and see everything that I'm doing. And then also, if you have a little time in February and March, to follow my administrative page, CBD DePaul, which is where we'll be hosting a lot of student scholarship and a lot of their work in the next few weeks. So very exciting things coming up.
I will definitely be following, all of the platforms and work you got going on. It's been a pleasure to be in conversation with you and to see Little Man in the background.
Thank you.
I am kind of in a hibernation sort of phase, I'll say. So nothing public facing going on right now. Just kind of doing a lot of reading, a lot of studying, trying to get back into dancing more. Haven't been doing that in a while. Doing some public, performances coming up, but that's about it. But again, pleasure to be in conversation with you, Sister Jennifer and Sister Lindsay.
Thank you so much. And that what you're doing, that is how the things come to be. So I'm happy to hear that you're in that phase of reflection, that phase of hibernation, because that's what we all have to do to really know what spirit is guiding us to do next. So thank y'all so much for being here. Y'all are phenomenal, literally. And I want to remind our audience to connect with them, but also to connect with Gumbo the Podcast. You can go to our new website, gumbothepodcast.com, and also find us on Instagram at Gumbo the Podcast. And I hope you enjoyed your bowl.